Approximately 199,000 people are victims of human trafficking each year in just the US alone. This is a serious social problem, and it isn't just a US issue, but it's a global problem because it spans every continent, such as Europe, Africa, Asia, and South America, impacting more than 115 countries. It's been estimated that there's about 40.3 million victims of human trafficking globally. This crime organization makes about $150 billion annually for the traffickers. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, human trafficking is the act of compelling or coercing a person's labor, services, or commercial sex acts. It's a global human crisis and can impact victims of any age, race, gender, or nationality. For this video, I will be focusing on human trafficking for sex and not labor. Human trafficking violates an individual's right to life, liberty, security, and the right not to be tortured or subjected to cruel or inhumane treatment. There's an ongoing question of whether legalizing prostitution would help to deter human trafficking. If prostitution were legal and a person was no longer forced to provide sex acts, it would no longer be a violation of their human rights, if they were doing this willingly. Additionally, if it were legalized and they were still coerced or forced, they would not be as hesitant to report this to authorities because they wouldn't get in trouble themselves. While there are some benefits to legalizing prostitution, doing so would not hinder human trafficking, and it could in fact cause it to increase. According to research by Seo Young Chu et al., legalized prostitution leads to an expansion of the prostitution market, increasing human trafficking. The study further researched Sweden, and once prostitution was criminalized, the prostitution market shrank, and Sweden also saw a decline in human trafficking. Legalizing prostitution will increase the market for prostitutes, pimps, and buyers, making the entire market larger and more accessible to everyone. Therefore, increasing the demand for human trafficking will increase their supply of victims. Legalizing prostitution will not help younger children who are trafficked, as they would not be a part of legalized prostitution. Most countries require the age of consent for a prostitute to be 18 years or older. According to a study in 2021 of 450 U.S. criminals case survivors of human trafficking, 57% were minors. There were 51,657 known victims of trafficking that spanned 166 countries. Of these victims, approximately 18% of those trafficked were female children, and the other 17% were male minors. This shows that a significant number of buyers seek underage individuals to exploit. These individuals, who are often pedophiles, are unlikely to be interested in adult prostitutes and instead seek out children to abuse. This information confirms that legalizing prostitution will not reduce the trafficking of underage individuals, and they remain vulnerable to exploitation. Finally, legalization of prostitution will not actually help poor and vulnerable communities, but instead make them more at risk for exploitation. According to Humanity United, poverty is the root cause of human trafficking, and the recent survey showed that out of 88 survivors of human trafficking, 42 were unable to pay their expenses before they were trafficked, and 54 were unable to pay their bills during the time they were trafficked. Individuals from poor backgrounds, most of whom have minimal exposure to education, lack good career opportunities, and are exposed to social bias, are most exposed to exploitation by traffickers. These traffickers are again able to trick the poor and vulnerable by promising them employment or educational opportunities that are completely fake. Sometimes parents have sold their children because they are in such a state of poverty that they can't afford to raise them. The victims from these vulnerable communities are often women and children who are forced into the sex trade because they believe it's the only way that they can survive. Rather than lifting them out of poverty, legalized prostitution just creates a situation that traps these poor victims in dangerous environments where they typically must work for their pimps or traffickers. They are then in dangerous situations with both the sex work that they do, which can impact their health and well-being, as well as the potential violence from these traffickers or pimps. In addition, if prostitution is legalized, the traffickers learn how to find loopholes in the system to still target the poor and vulnerable for human trafficking. Often, these people aren't aware who or where to go to for help, and they lack knowledge about their human rights. They are afraid, so their human rights will continue to be violated. Therefore, legalizing prostitution simply makes it easier for traffickers to do business without fear of being caught and incarcerated. Legalizing prostitution would help women have greater access to healthcare. This would allow them to be less fearful and more open to talking about STDs and abuse. However, as the research shows, legalizing prostitution will not help the majority of women and girls who will still be illegally trafficked, so the risk to the poor and vulnerable communities will not decline at all. As noted, legalizing prostitution has proven to increase the demand for sex workers and has therefore increased human trafficking. In all, legalizing prostitution is not a method that should be utilized as a means to deter human trafficking. Thank you.